The massive warship cut through the darkness of space like a knife, its black hull absorbing what little starlight reached this remote sector. Admiral Gray stood at the command center's viewport, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. The ship's sensors had detected something unusual, a large vessel drifting in the void between stars. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to instant obedience. The crew worked quickly, their four-fingered hands moving across control panels with practiced efficiency. "Sir, it appears to be a colony ship, very old design, possibly centuries old," replied the sensor officer. "We're detecting multiple life signs in suspended animation, over 10,000 of them." Gray's interest peaked. In 300 years of Dominion rule across 200 star systems, they had never encountered a colony ship from an unknown species. The Dominion had made sure all spacefaring races were under their control long ago. "Bring it aboard," he ordered. The massive warship's tractor beams activated, gently pulling the ancient vessel into one of its cavernous hangars. Gray watched through the internal cameras as the ship came into clear view. It was roughly cylindrical, with massive engines at one end and the words ESSOP written in faded letters along its side. The investigation teams moved in quickly, their environment suits protecting them from any potential hazards. The ship's systems were dormant but intact, its nuclear batteries still providing power to the crucial cryogenic systems. The teams accessed the ship's computer core, and data began flowing to the command center. "Sir, they call themselves humans," reported the science officer. "Their world was dying. Climate collapse, resource depletion. They launched 12 colony ships. This was number 7. Gray studied the images of the sleeping humans. They looked surprisingly similar to his own species, though their skin tones varied more, and they lacked the characteristic ridge patterns of Dominion physiology. What interested him most was their technological level. While primitive compared to current Dominion standards, they had managed to build functional cryogenic suspension systems centuries ago. "Wake one of them," he commanded. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The medical team selected a human at random, a maintenance technician according to the ship's records. They carefully began the revival process, monitoring vital signs as the ancient cryogenic system executed its warming sequence. The human's eyes opened slowly, confusion evident on his face. He looked around the medical bay, taking in the alien technology and unfamiliar faces. Gray expected fear. It was what he was used to seeing in the eyes of every species that encountered the Dominion. Instead, he saw something else: calculation. The human spoke, his words incomprehensible but his tone steady. The translation system quickly adapted to the language found in the colony ship's database. "You're not the Colonial Reception Committee, I take it," the human said, his voice rough from centuries of disuse, but carrying an edge of humor. Gray was taken aback by the casual response. Most species, when faced with technically superior aliens, showed immediate submission. This human showed neither fear nor awe. "You and your fellow humans are now under the protection of the Dominion," Gray announced, using the standard greeting that had worked so well with other species. "Your primitive vessel was found drifting in space. We have rescued you." The human's eyes narrowed slightly. "Rescued? That's an interesting way to put it. Those stun weapons your guards are carrying suggest otherwise." Gray felt a flutter of unease. The human had noticed the weapons despite them being carefully concealed. More importantly, he had correctly identified their purpose, despite never having seen such technology before. "You are very observant," Gray said, "but you should understand your situation. The Dominion rules this sector of space. All species here exist under our guidance and protection." The human nodded slowly, but his eyes held something that made Gray uncomfortable. Not submission, but patience, like a predator waiting for the right moment. "I understand completely," the human replied. "When will you be waking the others?" "Gradually, as we can evaluate each one," Gray said. "We must ensure a smooth integration into Dominion society." The human smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. That makes perfect sense. As Gray left the medical bay, he felt satisfied with the initial contact. Yet something bothered him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in centuries of commanding Dominion forces. It wasn't until he reached his quarters that he identified it. Doubt. He had no way of knowing it then, but that doubt was the first crack in the foundation of the Dominion's power. The humans were awake, and the age of ruling through fear was about to end. The steady hum of medical equipment filled the room as another cryopod completed its warming cycle. Captain Jack Miller opened his eyes slowly, his military training kicking in immediately. He kept his breathing steady and his movements minimal, taking in his surroundings through barely open eyes. The room was clearly a medical facility, but the technology was unlike anything he'd seen before. Alien figures moved around him, their movements efficient and practiced. They wore what looked like advanced medical gear, but he noticed the subtle bulk of hidden weapons under their clothes. "The subject is conscious," one of them announced. Miller noticed they were speaking English, probably through some kind of translation system. He decided to play along, acting groggy and confused like a normal person would after centuries of sleep. Where am I?" he asked, letting his voice shake slightly. "This isn't Colony 7. A tall figure stepped forward, clearly someone of authority based on how the others deferred to him. "You are aboard the Dominion warship Eternal Night. We found your vessel drifting in space and rescued your people." Miller fought to keep his expression neutral. He'd already spotted 3 other humans in the medical bay, all looking equally alert despite their pretense of confusion. He recognized Dr. Anna Wells, the ship's systems specialist, quietly observing everything while appearing to stare blankly into space. "How many of us have you woken?" Miller asked, letting a tremor of fear enter his voice. "You are part of the second group," the alien commander replied. "We are proceeding carefully to ensure your safe integration into Dominion society." Miller noticed how the commander emphasized the word Dominion, watching for their reaction. He gave them what they wanted, a slight flinch and downcast eyes. "We're very grateful for your help," he said softly. The medical team began their tests, taking samples and measurements while explaining nothing. Miller complied with every request, all while memorizing the layout of the room, the patterns of the guard rotations, and the location of every piece of equipment that could potentially be used as a weapon. Hours later, they were moved to what was clearly a holding area, though the aliens called it temporary accommodation. The room was comfortable enough, but the security measures were obvious to anyone with military training. Miller waited until the evening meal was delivered before gathering the other humans in what he hoped was a blind spot in the surveillance. "Report," he whispered. Dr. Wells spoke first, her voice barely audible. "Their technology is advanced, but it's stagnant. I saw multiple systems that haven't been updated or improved in what must be centuries. They rely too heavily on automation." Tom Reed, the engineer they'd woken in the first group, nodded in agreement. "Their weapons are powerful but predictable. Everything runs on standardized protocols. No variation, no adaptation." Miller processed this information. "They're not used to resistance," he concluded. "They've been in power so long they've forgotten how to innovate." He looked at each of them in turn. "How many of us are awake now?" 23, Wells replied. "They're keeping us separated in different sections, but I mapped out the locations during our medical transfers." Miller smiled grimly. "Good. They think we're primitives, barely worth considering as a threat. That's their first mistake." He looked at Reed. "Can you access any of their systems?" Reed's eyes lit up. "They use neural interfaces for everything. But I noticed something. Their backup systems are all manual, probably hasn't been touched in generations. They've forgotten about them, but they're still there." "Perfect," Miller said. "They rule through fear because no one's ever shown them anything else." He leaned in closer. "We're going to change that. But first, we play along. Be scared. Be primitive. Let them think we're like all the others." The others nodded, understanding the plan without needing it spelled out. They'd been soldiers, scientists, and survivors before going into cryo sleep. Now they were going to be something else. Revolutionaries. As they broke apart, returning to their assigned spaces before the guards could get suspicious, Miller caught a glimpse of the alien city through a viewport. It stretched out across the surface of a massive space station, all gleaming towers and orderly streets. The Dominion's power was evident in every building, every ship that passed by. But Miller saw something else too. Fear. The other alien species moved quickly, heads down, never meeting the eyes of the Dominion guards. They were trapped in a cage built of their own terror. Miller closed his eyes, remembering Earth's final days. Humans knew fear too, but they had learned something these aliens hadn't. Fear could become anger, and anger could change worlds. Dr. Anna Wells sat quietly in a learning center, pretending to be amazed by the basic computer systems the Dominion used to teach their primitive guests. Her fingers moved slowly across the screen, deliberately making mistakes as the alien instructor watched with poorly hidden impatience. "No, no," the instructor said, reaching over to correct her input. "Like this." His sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing the neural interface port on his wrist. Wells noted how it matched exactly the designs she'd seen on every other Dominion citizen, unchanged for centuries. "Oh, I see," she said, letting her voice tremble slightly. "It's all so advanced. We never had anything like this on Earth." The lie came easily. Their own neural interfaces had been far more elegant, but the Dominion didn't need to know that. In another section of the station, Tom Reed was having similar success playing the role of an overwhelmed primitive. He had been assigned to basic maintenance tasks, the Dominion believing that was all he could handle. They didn't realize that while he cleaned their machinery, he was mapping every circuit, every backup system, every forgotten manual override. "These cleaning bots are amazing," he said to his supervisor, who barely glanced at him. "On our ship, we had to do everything by hand." The supervisor nodded dismissively, never noticing how Reed's eyes lingered on the bot's access panel, memorizing its construction. Captain Miller spent his days in what the Dominion called cultural integration sessions. They showed videos of their great empire, their powerful weapons, their absolute control. They clearly expected him to cower like the other subject species. Instead, he watched everything with intense focus, building a mental map of their weaknesses. "The Dominion brings peace through strength," the instructor declared, showing footage of their warships destroying some long-ago rebellion. "Those who accept our protection prosper, those who resist." The image showed a planet's surface being scorched clean. "We understand," Miller said softly, sharing scared looks with the other humans in the room. The instructor smiled, satisfied with their apparent fear. He never noticed how they used these sessions to silently communicate with each other through subtle hand signals developed during their military training. Late in the night cycle, when the Dominion thought they were sleeping, the humans gathered in small groups in the blind spots they'd discovered in the surveillance systems. They shared information in whispers, building their knowledge of the empire that held them captive. Their AI systems run everything, Wells reported to Miller in one such meeting. But they're ancient. The Dominion hasn't updated them in so long, they've forgotten how the original code even works. They just maintain what's there. Reed nodded in agreement. And their backup systems are a joke. They're so confident in their tech, they haven't tested the manual overrides in generations. Half of them probably don't even work anymore. Miller processed this information, his mind working through the possibilities. "How many of us are awake now?" 52, Wells replied. "They're still waking more, but slowly. They're being careful, running all sorts of tests. They think they're studying us. But we're the ones really doing the studying," Miller finished. "What about the other species, the ones already under Dominion control?" Reed leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "They're beaten down, but not broken. I see it in their eyes when the guards aren't looking. They want to fight back. They just don't know how. Miller smiled grimly. Then we'll show them. The Dominion thinks fear is power, but they've forgotten something important. He looked at each of them in turn. Fear can burn out. It can turn to anger. And anger can spread like fire if you give it a chance. They broke up their meeting carefully, returning to their assigned quarters before the guards made their rounds. As Wells lay in her bed, she heard the distant hum of the station's massive engines. The sound that the Dominion thought displayed their power actually revealed their greatest weakness. They hadn't changed that sound in centuries. They hadn't needed to, because no one had ever challenged them. But humans were different. On Earth, they had faced extinction and survived. They had faced fear and learned to turn it into determination. Now, as more of their people woke each day, that determination was slowly building into something the Dominion had never faced before. Hope. The empire that ruled through fear was about to learn that fear had a weakness. It only worked if you let it. Tom Reed's hands moved quickly across the maintenance panel, his movements hidden by the bulk of the cleaning robot he was supposedly fixing. The Dominion guard standing nearby looked bored, clearly thinking the primitive human was harmless. Reed kept his head down, fighting to hide his smile as his fingers found the manual override he'd been searching for. Almost done, he mumbled, playing up his uncertainty with the alien technology. The guard didn't even bother to respond, turning away to watch a group of Dominion officials walk past. Reed used that moment to slip a small device into the robot's circuitry, one of many he'd built from parts stolen over the past weeks. In another section of the station, Dr. Wells was making similar progress. She sat at her learning terminal, appearing to struggle with basic calculations while actually accessing the station's deeper systems through a backdoor she'd discovered. The Dominion's overconfidence was their weakness. They hadn't updated their security protocols in centuries. Amazing, she said with fake wonder as her instructor explained a simple mathematical concept. Her fingers moved across the screen, apparently taking notes but actually planting a virus that would give them control of the station's internal sensors when the time came. Captain Miller watched it all unfold from his position in the Cultural Integration Center. 112 humans were now awake, each playing their part perfectly. The Dominion thought they were watching their prisoners, but they didn't realize every scared look and submissive gesture was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. "The time is coming," Miller whispered to Wells during their evening meal. The dining hall was noisy enough to cover quiet conversations, and they'd learned the surveillance systems couldn't pick up whispers among the clatter of dishes. "How many systems can we access?" "Almost all of them," Wells replied, pretending to focus on her food. "Reed's devices are in place. We can shut down their weapons, their communications, and their security systems. They won't know what hit them." Miller nodded slightly. "And the other species, the ones they've enslaved?" "They're ready," Wells said. "We've been spreading the word quietly. They don't know exactly what's coming, but they know to be ready when things start happening." The next morning, everything seemed normal on the station. The Dominion guards went about their usual routines, barely paying attention to their supposedly harmless human charges. None of them noticed the subtle tension in the air, the way the humans moved with slightly more purpose than usual. Reed was the first to move. While cleaning near a major power junction, he activated his hidden devices with a simple command through the primitive tablet they'd given him. Throughout the station, cleaning robots suddenly stopped responding to Dominion controls. At the same moment, Wells triggered her virus. The station's internal sensors went dark, then came back online showing false data. The Dominion's vaunted security systems were now lying to them, showing empty corridors while humans moved freely through them. Miller gave the signal, a simple cough that was repeated by human after human throughout the station. They moved with military precision, using the skills they'd kept hidden for so long. The Dominion's automated defense systems, which they relied on completely, were useless against manual overrides they'd forgotten existed. "What's happening?" a Dominion officer shouted as his neural interface stopped responding. Around him, other Dominion citizens were experiencing the same problem, their technological advantages disappearing one by one. The humans revealed their true nature in an instant. Gone were the scared, submissive primitives. In their place stood trained soldiers and skilled professionals who had spent weeks learning every weakness of their captors. Reed's voice came over the station's communication system, using the override codes he'd discovered. "Attention all non-Dominion species. The time has come. The systems are down. The guards are blind. You are free." The station erupted into chaos, but it was controlled chaos, carefully planned and executed. The humans had spent weeks teaching the other enslaved species how to fight back, showing them that fear could be overcome. As alarms blared uselessly throughout the station, Miller led his team toward the command center. The Dominion was about to learn a hard lesson. Technology without innovation was just a crutch, and fear without understanding was no match for human determination. The command center of the Dominion station erupted into panic as system after system went dark. Admiral Gray stood at his command post, watching helplessly as his perfect order collapsed into chaos. The screens around him showed impossible things: security doors opening on their own, weapons systems powering down, and communication channels filling with static. "Sir, we've lost control of the lower levels," an officer reported, his usual confidence replaced by fear. The humans, they're not just escaping. They're fighting back. Gray's mind struggled to understand what was happening. These were primitives, barely able to understand Dominion technology. Yet somehow they had taken control of systems that had been unbreakable for centuries. In the corridors below, Captain Miller led his team with practiced efficiency. The humans moved like shadows through the station, using the blind spots they had mapped out over weeks of careful observation. Behind them came waves of freed aliens, former slaves now turning on their masters with a fury born from generations of fear. Team 2, secure the armory. Miller commanded through the communication system Reed had hijacked. Team 3, get to the docking bays. Don't let them call for reinforcements. Dr. Wells worked at a captured control station, her fingers flying across the interface as she dismantled the Dominion's automated defenses one by one. "Their AI is fighting back," she reported. "But it's predictable. It's using the same patterns it's been using for hundreds of years." The station shook as something exploded in the lower levels. The Dominion guards were trying to use their neural interfaces to activate emergency protocols, but Reed's virus had turned their own technology against them. Every command they sent simply created more chaos in their systems. "They're trying to reach the Cryo chambers." Reed's voice came through the comm system. "They think they can use our sleeping people as hostages." Miller's face hardened. Not this time. He turned to a group of freed aliens, tall, strong beings that the Dominion had used as labor slaves. "Your people know the maintenance tunnels better than anyone. Can you get us there first?" The alien worker's eyes gleamed with newfound courage. "Follow me," he said, leading them through a hidden accessway the Dominion had never bothered to monitor. In the Cryo storage area, Dominion troops found themselves caught in a trap. The humans had anticipated this move, and now the guards faced not just human soldiers, but maintenance workers, cleaning staff, and service robots. All the people and machines they had considered beneath their notice now turned into a fighting force. Admiral Gray's voice boomed through the station's speakers, trying to regain control through fear. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we will make examples of you all." The response came not from Miller or the humans, but from 1,000 voices throughout the station. The enslaved species, watching humans fight back successfully for the first time, found their own courage. The Dominion's threats, which had controlled them for so long, suddenly seemed empty. "Your weapons don't work." Miller's voice cut through the chaos, calm and confident. "Your systems are down. Your neural interfaces are useless. For the first time in centuries, you have to fight with just your bodies and minds. Are you even remembering how?" In the command center, Gray watched in disbelief as his officers began to retreat. They had never faced real resistance before. All their training, all their technology, had been built around the assumption that fear would always work. Wells' virus spreads through the station's network, finding more systems to corrupt. Reed's devices turned more and more of the station's automation against its masters, and Miller's forces, human and alien alike, moved with unstoppable determination toward the command center. "Sir," a junior officer reported to Gray, his voice shaking, "we're getting reports from other stations. The slaves, they're all rising up. The humans taught them how to fight back. The whole system is falling into chaos." Gray stared at the reports in horror. The humans hadn't just broken free. They had shown every oppressed species in the Dominion that fear could be overcome. The carefully maintained order of centuries was shattering, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the corridors below, Miller smiled as he heard the news. The Dominion was learning a lesson that humanity had learned long ago. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one who has never known fear. It's the one who has faced fear and learned to fight anyway. 3 days after the initial uprising, the Dominion's largest military fleet arrived at the station. 50 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons primed and ready. Admiral Gray stood straighter, watching through the command center's viewport as his reinforcements arrived. "Surrender now," he broadcast to the rebels, "or face total destruction." He expected fear, panic, maybe even immediate surrender. Instead, he heard laughter, human laughter, coming through his communication system. "You still don't understand, do you?" Miller's voice was calm, almost pitying. "Take a closer look at your fleet, Admiral." Gray's confidence faltered as he studied the tactical display. The massive warships, pride of the Dominion fleet, were not responding to commands. Their weapons remained silent, their engines dead in space. "Impossible," he whispered. In the station's main control room, Dr. Wells smiled as she watched her work unfold. The same virus that took down the station's systems, she explained to the alien technicians gathered around her. Their ships used the same outdated protocols. They never thought they'd need to change them. The aliens watched in amazement as she demonstrated how to bypass the Dominion's security systems. Throughout the sector, more stations and colonies were joining the rebellion. The humans shared their knowledge freely, teaching others how to fight back. "We're receiving transmissions from 30 different worlds," Reed reported, working at his own console. "The slave species are rising up everywhere. They're using our tactics, our strategies. The Dominion can't stop them all." On one of the nearby planets, the locals had already overthrown their Dominion governors. The sight of humans successfully resisting had awakened something in them, not just courage, but innovation. They were adapting human tactics to their own unique abilities, creating new ways to fight back. "The Dominion's entire system is breaking down," Miller explained to a group of rebel leaders. They had gathered in what was once Gray's private conference room, planning their next moves. They relied on fear and technology to maintain control. "We've shown everyone that both can be overcome." A tall, serpentine alien, once a slave in the Dominion's minds, spoke up. "But they still have armies. They still have weapons." Miller nodded. "Yes, but look at how they use them. Every tactic, every strategy is centuries old. They haven't had to adapt or improve in so long. They've forgotten how. And now," he gestured to the tactical display showing more rebellions springing up across Dominion space. In the docking bay, newly freed slaves worked alongside humans to modify ships and weapons. The Dominion's technology was powerful but predictable. Reed had shown them how to make simple changes that rendered their most advanced security systems useless. "They thought fear would keep us in line forever," one of the alien engineers said as they worked. "They never understood that fear can turn into anger, and anger can make you strong." Admiral Gray watched helplessly as more reports of rebellion came in. His perfect order, maintained for centuries through fear and superior technology, was crumbling. The humans had done more than just resist. They had shown others how to think differently, how to adapt and overcome. "Sir," one of his few remaining officers reported. "We're getting reports of ships deserting. Even some of our own people are joining the rebels." In the station's medical bay, Wells worked with alien doctors to wake more humans from cryo sleep. Each new awakening strengthened their position, bringing new skills and ideas to the rebellion. But more importantly, it showed the galaxy something they had never seen before: humans working alongside aliens as equals, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it. The Dominion taught everyone that power comes from making others afraid. Miller said to his growing coalition of rebels, "We're teaching them something different. Real strength comes from working together, from adapting and growing." As the sun set on another day of rebellion, news spread across the sector. The Dominion's iron grip was failing. Their fear-based control was crumbling in the face of something they had never planned for: hope. The humans had brought more than just resistance. They had brought change. And change, once started, could not be stopped. 1 month after the first uprising, the Great Hall of the former Dominion Command Station hosted a very different kind of gathering. Representatives from 50 alien species sat together, no longer separated by the artificial hierarchies of their former masters. At the center of the assembly stood Captain Miller, Dr. Wells, and Engineer Reed, along with leaders from the various freed worlds. "The last Dominion stronghold surrendered this morning," Miller announced to the gathered representatives. The news was met not with cheers, but with thoughtful silence. Everyone in the room understood that winning the war had been just the beginning. Now came the harder part: building something better. Admiral Gray sat in the corner, no longer a prisoner but not quite free. The humans had surprised everyone again by not executing captured Dominion leaders. Instead, they were made to watch and participate in the rebuilding process. "You could have killed us all," Gray said to Miller after the main assembly dispersed. "That's what we would have done." Miller smiled slightly. "That's exactly why you lost. You never learned that there are stronger things than fear." Throughout the station, signs of change were everywhere. The stark, intimidating architecture of the Dominion was being transformed. The former slave species added their own art and cultural touches, turning cold corridors into vibrant spaces that celebrated diversity instead of fearing it. Dr. Wells had turned the learning centers into true schools, where knowledge was shared freely. The sight of Dominion children learning alongside the children of former slaves would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. Now it was becoming normal. "We're not just teaching technology," she explained to a group of alien educators. "We're teaching innovation, creativity, the ability to question and improve." She gestured to a classroom where students from different species work together to solve problems. "These children will grow up knowing that difference is strength, not weakness." In the engineering sections, Reed worked with teams of mixed species, combining their various technological knowledge. The Dominion's rigid standardization was being replaced by a vibrant exchange of ideas. "Look at this," he said excitedly, showing Miller a new device. "It combines Dominion power systems with 3 different alien technologies. It's better than anything any of us could have made alone." The ESS Hope, the human colony ship that had started it all, was being transformed into a museum and learning center. Its cryo chambers, now empty, stood as a reminder of how change had come to the galaxy. But the ship's name had taken on new meaning. Hope was no longer just for survival, but for a better future. "We thought we were leaving Earth to find a new home," Miller said as he walked through the ship's corridors with a group of alien leaders. "Instead, we found a whole galaxy that needed what humanity had learned through our own struggles: that fear can be overcome, that cooperation is stronger than control, and that diversity brings strength." The former Dominion territories were reorganizing into a new alliance, one based on mutual respect and cooperation. Each species contributed its unique strengths and perspectives. The humans' role was not to rule, but to guide and share what they had learned through their own history of overcoming challenges. "But what if someone tries to build another empire like the Dominion?" a young alien asked during one of the planning sessions. Miller's answer was simple: "Then we'll face it together, as equals." The Dominion fell not just because of human resistance, but because every species they oppressed chose to stand up together. That's the real power they never understood. As the sun rose on another day in the new alliance, ships from dozens of worlds moved freely through space. The automated checkpoints and patrol vessels of the Dominion were gone, replaced by a cooperative defense fleet crewed by mixed species teams. In the Great Hall, Miller looked out at the stars, remembering Earth and the long sleep that had brought them here. The ESS Hope had been launched to save humanity from a dying world. Instead, it had brought hope to an entire galaxy. "We did it," Wells said, joining him at the viewport. "We really did it." Miller nodded, watching ships from formerly enemy species working together to rebuild a nearby station. "We did more than survive," he said. "We showed them all how to live." Behind them, the sounds of many species talking, laughing, and working together filled the station. The age of fear was over. The age of hope had begun.